All right, I'm going to give a talk on just kind of a small project / experiment I did and something we've been using our app to in production. But I want to make sure nobody takes away from this that I'm kind of advocating for using React over Ember or anything like that. It's really more of just kind of an exploratory thing that solves some particular problems we have in Ember and does it in a way that is good for us. But yeah, so just a little background on me. I built a couple EmberScript projects, or Ember-related projects, EmberScript and EPF. EPF's a kind of a replacement for Ember Data. And I work at a small startup called Outreach. We're just 2 developers right now. We've been 2 developers for a while. We build a sales automation tool. And yeah, it's at outreach.io is the website. And we've been using Ember for quite a long time. This is kind of a screenshot of a router in a project I did over a year ago. That's CoffeeScript too, so that's a lot of routes. I think that project had like a couple hundred routes at the end of the day. And so we've seen a lot of problems in Ember, and we've seen a lot of different solutions for different UI things we need to do. And just, so we've thought about a lot of different things and how we do it in Ember. And I mean, we're at the Ember.js meetup, so I'm sure you guys, know what Ember.js is. I mean, it's really just, there's a lot of different things. There's models, views, controllers, templates, components, helpers, routes. React, as a little background, it's written in open source by Facebook, but really React is just components. It's components and their life cycles and their states. And it's very lightweight, and it does some cool things with components, which I'll talk about more in a bit. And I mean, 2 frameworks. I think a lot of people view React and Ember as competing frameworks, but on some level they're not. React is very lightweight, as I just said, and when you really look at just like a size comparison, adding React to your stack is it's not making a 2x change. It's just it's less than a sixth of just your basic dependencies for Ember. And I mean, I'm sure you have lots of other JavaScript plugins adding on top of that. So I think from a size perspective, it's these days relatively minimal. And why are we using React? Why even like come up with this concoction in the first place? I think these next couple slides will kind of answer that. Some of you might have seen this performance comparison. There's like a JS fiddle out there. And I think it's one of the worst performance comparisons ever. Because really, if you're using an MVC framework to do animation, something that's very just specifically animation, I think you're already doing it wrong. And I think, moreover, this doesn't really represent the real bottlenecks in an application. For us, it's not changing a style property on something over and over. It's actually the initial render time, which I'll talk more about in a second. That's just kind of a joke, but yeah, that's one of the core team members. Ember.js will be the #1 JS framework for spinning circles. But for us, in our application, our biggest bottleneck is the initial render time. When you load a page, maybe there's pagination where a lot of the app changes at once. That takes a lot of time sometimes, and we want that to be very fast. And Ember is heavily optimized for changes, not for getting the app up on the page really quickly. So I'm actually going to show our app really quickly, just to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about. It's our staging server, but this is our actual application. Our application has a lot of CRM-like functionality. So this is an index page. We have quite a few pages that look like this. But as you can see, there's a lot of data. A lot of stuff is showing. There's a lot of DOM nodes. Just doing a little pagination here. Half this time is actually, it's going to the server, so there's a little bit of delay. But if I go back, it's cached. It's relatively quick rendering. The problem here is that this isn't Ember. Like when we originally built this with Ember, it was prohibitively slow. We couldn't actually do just plain Ember. And so what we actually did here is what we do currently, what this page does, is it just renders a raw template with none of the Ember goodness in it. And Instead, we have to just render a straight template and go back to the Stone Age where we just add callbacks and things like that with jQuery, which we really don't like doing that. It's a mess, and it kind of undermines the reason we pick a framework like Ember.js in the first place. And performance optimization sucks. Like in Ember today, there are a couple options. There's this group helper, which at this point I think is pretty antiquated. It has been updated for a couple years. There's a list view, which is good for displaying large rows of data, but I don't think it really solves the initial render problem very much. And Ember table. These have constraints too. Like in order to change the size, you have to do a JavaScript. The browser won't do it for you. Or you can use a custom render method. And that's what we do, and that's what I just showed you. What we really want is we want performance optimizations to be few and far between. In our current Ember app, which what I just showed you, we have to do these optimizations on most of our pages that are complex pages that show lots of data, particularly around lists. And that kind of becomes one of the biggest pain points in our development process because we lose much of what the framework gives us. We want to still benefit from our framework in these hot code paths. And the way we're solving it, we really don't gain much in those places. We're really essentially doing backbone style view rendering. And we also want to reuse as much code as possible. If we're not using Ember, it makes it we can't use components in that index page. Like if we have a great component to display some components of that list item in that index view, we can't use it because we're not actually using Ember for that page. It turns out that React does a really good job at this. React is really good at re-rendering everything anytime you want. And it uses something called a shadow DOM to make this really fast. So the idea behind React is instead of just updating one thing on a page, you can update the entire page anytime you want, and React is smart enough to make that really, really fast. So we wanted to benefit from some of this React goodness inside of our Ember application because we have a pretty big Ember application and we're still going to use Ember, but we wanted to at least check out React. So we did that, and I took some of our learnings and some of the components we built and just dumped it into this project called Ember React. And this is a link. I'll put this presentation up later, and it's on GitHub. And it's a relatively simple project. It's just a simple set of utilities to make using React inside of Ember easy. And it works really well inside of existing Ember applications, kind of like spookily well. And I'll just go into a demo right now of that. So this right here is an Ember CLI project. It's just an Ember CLI project. This is an Ember application. There are a couple routes. You can kind of see these different routes on the side. This is kind of a contrived index page rendered with Ember. It's quite a bit simpler than the one in our app, but I think it's complex enough that it kind of demonstrates some of the problems you might face using just straight Embering, straight Ember. So it's paginated. As you can see, I'm just clicking the next page, and there's no latency here going to the server. This is just rendering the index page with Ember and just conventional Ember. To kind of give you an idea what that means, like this right here is a Gravatar component. In the far right, this is a helper that uses moment.js to render that relative time. And it's just straight Ember, and there's zero server latency. But when you click through these pages, like I just clicked that a couple of times, it took a while to render this page. I don't know how many DOM nodes there are, but this is 100 rows. And this is actually, we use 100 rows in our application too, because that's actually the number customers wanted, just because they're used to that number. And it could be adjustable as well. But I mean, even half of this render time down to 50 would still be unacceptably slow. And in our application, as you can, I'll show that again, it was significantly more complex. We have this histogram, we have all of these links, there's multiple collections rendered inside of this. There's like tags plus stages and things like that. So, this is a simpler example, and it's still, in my mind, unacceptably slow. And in our case, if we did it in plain Ember, it would take a couple seconds just for pagination disregarding the server time, and that was just prohibitive. So we have to drop down to this big optimization, and it was a pain in the ass. So, and this is the identical page rendered with React, and as you can see, it's quite a bit quicker. But the takeaway here is that not only is it quicker, but it's also conventional. It's not like this is some special optimized React code. This is just React, plain React. In fact, the code looks very similar to the Ember code. This gravatar is a component. This time ago on the far right is a component. These tags are a collection that's rendered. It's just conventional code. And in this case, when we used React here, we didn't have to even think about anything related to performance. We could just code it how we wanted to code it, use as many components, reuse as much code as possible, and it just worked. So it's these index pages and these performance bottlenecks which got us looking into React in the first place, because we didn't want to just do straight template rendering and really primitive DOM manipulation to get these index pages to work. We wanted to have something that was conventional and felt really good to code, and that's what we tried to create with Ember React. And so one thing to note too is if you look here, this actually this is routed right here. It follows a similar routing convention as the Ember section. This actually uses React's router inside of Ember's router, believe it or not, and it works pretty well. And I'll talk more about that in a second. Yeah, as you can see, like the query parameter at the top updates and all as well. So yeah, so just to kind of, I'm not going to talk super in depth about React in terms of code, but just kind of a high level, like this is a React component in this example app, which is part of the repo and you can see on GitHub. A component just has a render method and it just returns what looks like HTML, but it's actually JSX. But I'm not going to really talk about that. But it's just a render method and it's just JavaScript code that basically returns what looks like DOM. And Ember React provides a helper if you want to use it inside of your Ember app that makes it really easy to just drop a React component inside of your Ember app. So this is an Ember handlebars template. If I wanted to use this was an app/react/timeago.js. If I wanted to use this inside of my Ember template, I can just use this React helper and pass in time ago. Very similar to when you reference other things in Ember. And I can even pass in variables like date. This actually passes this date to this React helper. And this is actually bound too. So if in the Ember world, this date were to update, this React component would re-render. React routing is actually, so routing is actually not baked into React, unlike Ember. There's a project called React Router, actually written by some former Ember dudes, Ryan Florence and Michael Jackson. And they based this React router on Ember.js's router. So it's very similar. This doesn't look that similar because it uses these React DOM node looking things, but really this is very similar. You can nest routes, has a name, it has a path, and this handler is a React component. And you can pass parameters, and it all, once you get past the syntax, it feels and behaves very similar to Ember's router. So you can actually use this React router inside of your Ember route using Ember React. This is an Ember route inside of the application. This is actually taken from that code you just saw. And basically, this Ember React monkey patches the Ember route to have taken additional React parameter. And this React parameter just takes a React class that'll be rendered at the outlet for that route. So you're basically just swapping out an Ember view for a React view for that route. And that React view could be this router that I just showed you. And at that point, the React router would take over routing. So there are a couple caveats there. You have to kind of set up your Ember routes in a particular way, which I can show you later at the end if you guys are interested. But for the most part, in a lot of ways, it just kind of works. So it's pretty cool. You can just like take a chunk of your app and just drop in React, even at the routing level, not just at the component level, and have it take over your app. It's pretty powerful. And we've actually done that in a few chunks of our application. So a couple of observations that I've picked up over doing this project is Ember is really good at reacting to individual changes. When you look at this example right here, in this Ember index page, when you check this checkbox, Ember is really smart and it knows just that checkbox has changed. And so it just re-renders that checkbox and anything that depends on that value of the checkbox. So in this case, it would just re-render this 1 up here to increase that number and this row. With React's kind of crazy. When I check this checkbox, this entire page re-renders. But it does it fast and smart enough that it's still acceptable, even though every time I'm checking this checkbox, the entire page is re-rendering. So Ember is a lot more sophisticated, and they've actually gone to great lengths to make it really good at picking up individual changes. But React is really good at rendering everything. And React also comes with its own set of opinions. I mean, there's a lot of talk about immutability and things like that in React, and has this concept of state and things like that. But you don't have to use that to actually be using React. And React is also slightly awkward with complex models that aren't just like simple JSON, which, using Ember Data or something like that, there are complex models. I'm a big advocate of Ember Data and things like that, and EPF. And React doesn't really play super well with them, but it works. And I think a big takeaway from this is Ember conventions can really be used outside of Ember. Ember's conventions make building apps really, really nice and easy, but you can kind of mimic that in other places, and you can still get a lot of benefit from it. And so when would I use React within an existing Ember app? I think super performance critical places, we're really willing to go out on a limb and try something new to create an elegant solution for it. There's certain composable stuff, like React. I think composability with components, that's the beauty of components. You can use a component anywhere, drop it in different places. React is slightly more composable in certain scenarios. Like I run into a lot of problems with item controllers and complex components and things like that React doesn't have. But and also complex rendering. Another example in our app, let me just find something that uses React. So in this case, this conditions component right here, this is actually an Ember page. But this conditions component is actually a React component. And the reason why we use React is because it's actually rendering this component is pretty complex. It's this tree of conditions to filter down prospects. And because of its hierarchical nature, it's kind of messy. And each one of these could potentially have a different item controller too, depending on the type of field. And to do this in Ember, it kind of creates this like messy hierarchy of components, whereas using React, since we're just using plain JavaScript to do the rendering, it feels a little bit cleaner. So that's what I mean by complex rendering. And also, if you're, you just really want to do something crazy, I mean, I think it's a good way to learn React. Then you might have also heard something called Flux. This is kind of the application design pattern that a lot of people use when building Flux. It's not equal to React. You don't have to use Flux with React. It's all about unidirectional data flow, which is just like the opposite of Ember. And I'm not a big fan of this, but you don't have to use Flux when using React. And moreover, if you're using React inside of Ember, you wouldn't even think about Flux. So that's just kind of an aside. And just, components in general, I don't know if you've seen the news lately, but Ember 2.0 is going to come out soon, and this is the RFC that Tom posted a couple days ago. Looked amazing. It really looked like that's a lot of the things I want out of Ember, all captured on that document. It really didn't leave out that much. I mean, maybe a few things, but really, I think Ember 2.0 will solve a lot of these problems, and so I'm really excited about that. And just from the RFC, in Ember 2.0. We will be adopting a virtual DOM and data flow that model embraces the best ideas from React and simplifies communication between components. And we plan to transition to when a route is in, this eliminates a vestigial use of old style views and associate the top level template with a regular component. So really, it feels like Ember is moving a little bit in this direction, where components are everywhere, which is kind of how React behaves today. And I think, that coupled with Ember's conventions, I think will be very powerful. And I think Ember 2.0 will be big. And I'm very long on Ember. So even though I'm kind of touting React in this presentation, I think Ember has a massive amount of potential. I think it's funny too, Angular 2.0 is also kind of feels like this rewrite is kind of moving more in this direction. But unlike Ember, there isn't a clean migration path. Ember 2.0 is planning a clean migration path from existing Ember versions up to 2.0. So I think that's a good thing for Ember users today. And I think a really big takeaway for me is that, we're first and foremost JavaScript developers. And I think it's okay to like dip into other frameworks, and you don't have to just be an Ember developer. You can bring other things into your framework, build parts of your app in different technologies. And I think at the end of the day, you learn a lot, and I think you can identify what the best way to solve a problem is. And there are some things that Ember hands down that would frustrate me if I were to use entirely React in a project. I think Ember's object model, get set aside, is actually very nice. React has mix-ins and classes, but they're super primitive compared to Ember's object model. But the next version of React is going to try and tie into ES6, so it might be improved. But today, Ember's object model is very nice. And Chris Selden, who normally comes to these meetups, has done a great job of optimizing them. There are no conventions in React. It's just the Wild West. And Ember CLI, I think, is a very important project. I think it's really pushing ES6 forward, and it's really nice, and it's really maintained. There's lots of activity. It's very exciting. I don't feel like there is anything like that for React, and I think Ember CLI is a huge boon for Ember, and it's great. And async inside of React is kind of messy. It's really, React doesn't even think about promises or anything like that. React Router does, but even there, it's kind of a little bit different. And it just, dealing with async is a little bit more loosey-goosey, but that Ember does a much better job. And I love the Ember community, so I'm really excited about Ember 2.0. And I would also recommend this talk by Alex Matchner at an Ember NYC meetup, where he actually compares React versus Ember. And he does a better job keeping it more meta, and goes more into what React is and what Ember is, and what the differences between the two are, in a less hands-on but more informative way. And yeah, that's it. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
We've got a couple projects that probably have to run up a lot of interests as well. And we were looking at ways to break out another video list. And the stop this is, how do you take that list item, which represents some, Ember would be a model, some type of view that represents a model. How do you get back into the Ember data, Ember model world from that React list?
So, I mean, inside the React code, you'd still deal with the Ember object. So you'd actually still use all the same Ember data logic. You would just be rendering differently. So it's really, in that sense, you could even, with Ember React, you can actually still send actions to the controller even. So really, a lot of it just is around rendering, and you can build up your own React-specific component hierarchy to do rendering. But yeah, at the end of the day, you can still use your Ember models, but of course you have to use get and set and all that. So, but yeah, in that sense, it's just plain straightforward.
Is there a lot of DOM elements, or is it a big chunk of JSON memory?
So I mean, I really wish Chris was here, because he would give you the right answer. I think that the big difference, I mean, at the end of the day, both React and Ember are both rendering the same DOM, really. I mean, Ember probably has a little bit more setup with the script tags, but now those are gone. I think it really just comes down to the fact that Ember is heavily optimized to detect every single change that happens to that list. Any little variable that's rendered to that list, that's bound. So if it gets updated, Ember will update it. React won't. You have to be a little more manual about that. But it's really just that setup. I mean, every single dynamic part of that big list is dynamically bound in Ember, and that's a lot of just object creation and things like that. But yeah, ask Chris for the correct answer. Yeah, so in the React, but I mean, even then, like, just for the initial render, like when you paginate, in both Ember and React, everything's being rendered. The reason why this is super fast, when I check this checkbox in React, the entire render method gets called. So it's re-rendering this entire page, excluding the sidebar, just this main content. And React is really smart, and it realizes that these same DOM nodes were outputted by the same component structure before, and it'll just reuse those DOM nodes. And you can even go a step further and kind of add performance where you want it with React by giving it kind of hints as to when a component should re-render, if you want to. I think it would, but I mean, as far as I know, like this might exist actually, if there's a way to just completely unbind. Exactly. So I mean, presumably, if this were all unbound, you could have that, but unless somebody knows a good way to do that, what? Yeah. Yeah, you can't. There's not like a block unbound helper. Like the whole idea would be a block unbound helper. They'll just wrap the entire collection in just like an unbound helper, and then underneath that entire hierarchy, it's entirely unbound. But that doesn't exist. You can unbind individual variables, but I've actually tried that. We've fooled around with all sorts of stuff like that, where we just unbind everything. But I think it really breaks down on binding to these sub arrays right here, because each column here, or each row here rather, has a list of tags, which is a collection that's also rendered. And I think that adds a lot. Like, yeah, so the rule of thumb is like nested collections in Ember. If you're using nested collections in Ember, you're going to have a bad time. That's just kind of how it is.
Do you think that one-way binding by default is maybe going to help with that?
I mean, I certainly hope so. I mean, I think there's clearly a lot of room, like just that simple example of just being able to make everything unbound. If that were added in, I think it would be kind of complex to add in. That's probably why it's not in. But if that were added, it would be a big step forward in this whole thing. So I mean, I don't think this is a big insurmountable problem on Ember's behalf. I think it's just a problem that today we have problems with, and we went down a route of using React to get around this, and it works pretty well for us and allows us to use components with reckless abandon and still get performance out of it. So and listening to the other talks like Chris and you guys use components a lot, and so it's great to just be able to use components everywhere and not really have to, and just be able to optimize when you need it and not have to give up that component stuff. But I mean, there's also HTML bars. I think that's going to give a big boost to Ember's performance. And HTML bars plus one-way bindings plus a slew of other things that I think could be done to Ember, which haven't been done yet, could solve a lot of these problems. But yeah, so I mean, really, in this case, like this is really the big use case for us using React.
So if someone was looking at just starting a React project, what are the issues for them to figure out? You're just going to use React? So
React is just the Wild West. If you just start a React project, you're probably going to use Flux, and I don't like Flux at all. So, I think, if you just use React, you're going to have to kind of pick, how am I going to build my app now? I have components. How do I build my app? So you don't have Ember data. You don't have all that kind of stuff. I'm actually porting, or I already have, EPF is being renamed to Coalesce, and it's not Ember specific, but there is an Ember wrap around it that's the same as EPF. So theoretically, you could use that with React, and you get kind of the data layer. Then you need to have a convention, and so I don't know. I mean, still, that's one of the things Ember really has, is really strong conventions and a community really baked around those conventions. And I think that's invaluable, because you could build a React app all sorts of different ways, and but Flux has a community too, but I don't like that. So.
How are you recommending React versus add-ons?
I mean, really, at the end of the day, like if you look at the code, most of the code in this repo is the example. You know, it's just, it's, oh, this is just the example. I am now. And the funny thing is, Atom was unusable for me until they switched to React, and now it's fast enough to use. So I don't know. Maybe I was just thinking about React too much. But yeah, Atom. I tried Atom for the first couple of weeks when it first came out, and I could not use it, and I ditched it. But I tried it again after they switched to React, and it's actually pretty performant. It has a good community too, so there's lots of like plugins and things. So yeah, the actual React project itself is like, you know, it's an initializer with a helper component, a React component, and you know, that's pretty much it. So it's not a lot of code. One of the nice things about React is it's super lightweight. You can, you know, it just needs a DOM node to mount at, and the router, surprisingly, you know, works starting at a Ember route. So it's not published as an Ember CLI add-on, but I want to put it in something like that. Right now, it's just kind of a freestanding project with a, you know, you can, when you include it, it'll register the initializer, but it's not packaged up in a way it's not specifically an Ember CLI add-on. It's really just taking logic from our app that we use to use React and just put it somewhere so people could see it, because some people wanted to see it. I just don't like the whole unidirectional data flow. For instance, like, you know, it's just all about events, and there's not, it feels kind of primitive. You don't get promises. Like when you do an operation, you don't get a promise. You just say something, you assume it succeeds. If you want to know if there's an error, you can subscribe, listen for an error event. And it just feels, I don't know. It's just not really my cup of tea. But, you know, I think it has merit, but I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I haven't built a big Flux application, but at the surface, I don't really like it that much.
This bridge you built for Ember and React, how mature and painless is it to use?
I mean, that's a you know, that's a loaded question. I mean, it's not mature, obviously, but you know, we use it, and I think you'll have to learn a lot about React. So I think that's the biggest bottleneck. But really, there's not a lot of it really is just rendering, and you can use a custom render method already, and that's really what it is at the end of the day. I think a lot of the problems you would hit would be specifically around React's router and Ember's router, which, you know, that's kind of a hack, but it seems to work pretty well. But yeah, I mean, I think it'd be something to explore. I think it'd be something good to explore if you had some hot paths that you really wanted to make fast. But yeah, I don't know.
So you talked last time about using this raw handlebars. You wrote that all your raw handlebars and put in React in that.
Not all of it. So actually, the page I showed you was raw handlebars, but the code, the resulting code, was so gross that we wanted to find something better. So this right here, this is React. We use React in lots of other places. This is React, but this page I showed you right here, this is still raw handlebars right here. So I mean, in React, it's not as fast as raw handlebars. So if your page is really complex, even raw handlebars, you might have to use raw handlebars. But you know, as you can see, there is a decent performance gain, I think, with using React compared to this is the Ember one. So what I mean by that is this is a handlebars template that's rendering this view, but it does not have anything to do with Ember. It'd be just like you were using Backbone with handlebars. So Ember actually has a custom handlebars compiler that does a lot of stuff to the handlebars output to make things bound and to do a lot of other stuff, and to automatically use get and set on variables, or on objects rather, that this isn't using. And the reason we do that is because it's exactly that stuff, which makes it really slow. And we essentially just want everything to be unbound, is what I mean by just a lot of work to use raw handlebars. It's not a lot of work. I mean, you've probably done that exact same thing in other apps. It's just rendering a template, and you can give it some interactivity using jQuery and just adding handlers to different elements and things like that. But it just feels. But I mean, you kind of lose out on components, and you're back into like jQuery land, and it's kind of the exact type of code that an MVC framework gets you out of, and this kind of drops you back into it. Which, you know, it's not the end of the world. Like, we use this, and our customers use this, and it's, you know, works well enough. It's just not fun to maintain and update this kind of code.
So it's the initial render, but would it be the hooking habit bars back in, Ember back into the render after, or it's still, we still have some issues?
So I mean, the handlebars really is just a render. Like, when you click on, even though this isn't like a link to the Ember component, it still links to Ember. So it's just a handlebars. It's just one little part of your app. Still uses the same stuff. It's just rendered differently, and nothing's bound. And there's no actions, no components, no things like that. It's just.
One of the reasons I was asked, I'm really interested in the whole task thing. So you basically deliver a pre-rendered page and provide hooks that Ember can basically hook itself into. And so you get a very fast page render because you're delivering a pre-rendered page, but then Ember continues.
Oh, that's really interesting. Is that I haven't been following that.
That was just something that's proposed, and it hasn't come to fruition. It's something I've been like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's adding the hooks, which is creating the performance bottleneck right now. So I'm curious to see how that would actually solve the problem. But I mean, I definitely think there's ways to solve this problem. It's just, as of today, rendering lists, especially, we have some pages in our app that have like 2 collections inside of every list item, and it's just, I mean, you're building a web app, you shouldn't be limited and told not to do that. But, you know, we need to do that, and using Ember is prohibitively slow. So you're kind of put in this, you know, tough spot where until Ember solves it, you have to come up with some kind of optimization. And I think, and there are lots of different ways to optimize it. I haven't profiled it or anything like that. I think with the raw handlebars, it definitely goes down. But I don't know about React, actually. We don't really care that much about memory, but.
Have you done general profiling on the 150 rows, 1,000 you kind of get a sense of that?
I mean, our rule of thumb, like, it used to be like just rendering a big list was always bad with Ember, but now my rule of thumb is if there's a nested collection, you probably need to have some kind of optimization. Nested collection, and more than, you know, more than 10 rows, you probably need something. I mean, but it's also not the end of the world. Like, this is the Ember thing, and it's not you know, it's not life or, yeah, it's not, yeah, exactly. It's not life or death. It still works, but, you know, it gets a little slower when it's more complex, and, you know, it's nice to have an app that's just lightning fast, and that's kind of the experience we want to deliver, and we want to deliver that in a way that we don't have to heavily hand optimize.
Thanks, man. That's really great.
Yeah. And I wish I had a better response to that question about why I don't like Flux, but I can tell you more in depth later. But
so thanks again to classmates for having us. Remember, we're doing these hack nights up in the district, 65th.